Everybody, it's good to see all of you. We're getting ready to start on our next chapter of Treasure from the Haunted Pagoda. We kind of covered 2 chapters of the book last week, and now we're going into chapter 6. Now, as you recall, we've been hearing the stories that took place to Elder Eric V. Hare and his wife, as they were missionaries over 100 years ago in the country of what used to be called Burma, and now is called Myanmar. They had the mission station they had built along the banks of the Salween River at the location called Onda, and they were there to dig for treasure. But of course, the treasure they were looking for wasn't the treasure that the people knew about. All the people in the villages around knew that there was treasure rumored to be hidden in the old pagoda that had been abandoned by one of the villages there many years ago. Silver bricks that were supposedly buried under the haunted pagoda. Or, as we learned last week, an old man had come and said, actually, they weren't buried under the haunted pagoda. They were buried nearby, and I'll come dig them up. But he never did come dig them up. And the treasure that Eric and his wife were there to look for was not the diamond that was supposedly hidden inside of the old spirit tree on the other side of the river, a diamond that had been left there by an old village witch doctor, and a witch doctor who had cursed the spirit tree and said that if anybody ever tries to cut that tree down, they will die. If they try to get the diamond, they will die. No, no, no. Eric B. Hare and his wife were there looking for a different kind of treasure, the treasure of people who don't know Jesus. But about that spirit tree, at the end of last week, something mysterious was going on with that spirit tree. We had heard how 2 different times people had come to try to chop it down to get the diamond inside, and then they had cried out in pain, turned pale, and then later died. But now, one of Elder Hare's assistants, Brother Baird, and some of the boys from the school had decided they were going to chop that spirit tree down because they needed the wood to make new tables and desks for their school. Their school was growing in size and they needed more space. So they went across, they dug a big saw pit, they cut down the logs, and they started rolling them into position over the saw pit to start slicing them up into long boards. And just as the first log rolled into place on the saw pit, Brother Baird had cried out in pain and turned pale. Elder Hare looked at Elder Baird, at his pale face, the sweat pouring off of him as he clutched at his belly, groaning in pain. Oh! Elder Hare quickly jumped down to the saw pit, helped him climb up the ladder, and got him into the boat to cross the river back to the mission. And as they boarded the boat to cross the river, he could hear the villagers who had gathered all around to watch them work on the spirit tree. And the villagers were all saying, "Oh, yes, of course, of course. We knew this would happen. The devils got him." They crossed the river, and by the time they got across the river, Elder Baird was now delirious. He had a high fever. When they measured it with a thermometer, it was 105 degrees. That's very high. And Elder Baird's wife said to Elder Hare, "Oh, no, I thought he might be getting sick because he had a chill last night as well." And that's when Elder Hare knew what was going on. Ah, yes, this is malaria. He's having a malaria attack. But it was not a simple malaria attack. Malaria is an infection in your bloodstream that can make you have fevers for a few days and feel really miserable. But Elder Baird's attack was a very bad one. Not only was he getting high fevers and pains, and he was getting confused, he was even having black color in his urine. That meant that he was having really bad damage to his organs inside. Oh, how everyone on the mission station prayed for Elder Baird. They prayed and prayed. "God, we want you to win this battle. We know you're stronger than infection, and we know you're stronger than devils. And we know that the people are going to think this is a devil attack. We need you to show them that you're stronger than the devils." And after 10 days of praying, Elder Baird's fever finally went away, and he was able to get out of bed and return to work. And when he did get back about, moving around on the mission station, the villagers who had been watching to see what would happen all looked at each other and said, "Oh, well, of course, of course. Yes, yes. The white man's God is stronger than the devil's. Of course, of course." Now you might wonder, whatever did happen with that diamond that was hidden in the spirit tree? Or at least that's what everybody thought. Well, as Elder Baird and the schoolboys kept on sawing huge logs on the saw pit, nobody else was crying out in pain anymore. Nobody else was turning pale and getting sick. Nobody died. But one day while they were sawing, one person did cry out. He yelled in excitement, "Hey, hey, the saw just hit something hard. Stop the saw." And everybody gathered around the saw pit, and everybody's mind began to think the same thing. It's the diamond. A diamond would be strong enough to keep a saw from cutting through it. And they excitedly reset the saw on the other side of the log. They had cut halfway through it from this side. Now they were going to cut through from the other side until they got to the middle to see what was going on. And as they sawed frantically, everyone in the school began to gather around. People crossed the river from the mission station to come and stand around the saw pit and see what was happening. Elder Hare was so excited, he jumped down into the saw pit. He was helping them clear the sawdust out of the way. He had the little hammer and wedge ready to go so they could split the log open as soon as the cuts were done being made. And finally, the log was done being cut from both sides. They got the wedge in there, hit with the mallet, the log fell open, and everyone looked. And it was a lead bullet. A lead bullet! Must have been fired by a rifle. Who knows when in the past someone had fired a bullet at that tree and it had gotten lodged deep inside the trunk. And everyone looked at each other and bust out laughing. They couldn't believe they'd gotten so excited over what they thought had been a diamond. And they never did find a diamond in that spirit tree, even though they cut it up into boards. They never did find it, and yet they still got treasure from that tree. You know what that treasure was, don't you? The desks and tables they were able to make in order to keep teaching more people at the schools. And now they not only had a school in Onda and another school that we had heard about last week, but now they opened up a school in Tiger Village. And at that school, a student started attending that you need to hear about. His name was Very Tall. No, that really was his name. Often children would be named by descriptors. And so his parents must have thought he was a very tall baby when he was little, and they named him Very Tall. But now when he came to the school, he wasn't little anymore. He was 10 years old. And after spending 1 year there at the school, learning about God, reading his lessons, hearing the Bible, and becoming so excited about God, one day he got a very sad message. A messenger came from his village 4 miles away from Tiger Village, and he told Very Tall, your mother is sick. She is very sick, and she wants you to come and eat the devil worship so she can get better. Oh, Very Tall knew he needed to obey. He was not going to disobey his parents because they had called him to come. He wanted to go back home to his village anyway to visit everyone. And he told the teacher, though, at the Tiger Village, can I borrow a Bible from you? I don't have one. And I really want to keep reading and learning from the Bible. And the teacher did lend him the Bible. And he told the teacher, Tara, I'll be faithful. Remember, Tara is the Karen word for teacher. Tara, I'll be faithful. I'll be faithful. And then he walked all the way 4 miles to get to his home. And when he arrived and climbed up the ladder into his old hut, his mother was laying on the floor on a mat on the corner, on a mat in the corner of the room. And she looked over at him and she said, oh, Very Tall, your teeth are white. Now you might be wondering why she said that. Well, it's because usually the people growing up in these villages out in the jungle did not brush their teeth, nor did they bathe or wash their clothes, at least not very often. But because he had been attending the mission school, Very Tall had learned how to take care of his body because the body is an important temple. Our body is where the Holy Spirit lives. So he had learned to do, among other things, brushing his teeth every day. And now his teeth were very clean, way cleaner than his mother had ever seen them. So she was surprised by those clean teeth. And then she said, now, tonight we will roast the pig. We've been waiting for you to come so we can make the sacrifice to the devils. And Very Tall thought to himself, well, I know God is stronger than the devils, but I'm not going to say anything right now. I don't want to be rude to my mother and father. So he just stood quietly while his father killed a pig and roasted it. And that night, the father gathered everyone around the mother's bed, her little mat on the corner of the room, and he said a prayer to the devils. Oh, devils, here's a pig for you, here's a pig for you. Don't be angry, don't be angry. Let mother get better, let mother get better. Oh, devils, oh, devils. You see what their prayers were like. They usually repeated things. And they waited the next day. They waited the next day. She didn't get better. So the mother said, oh, maybe I need to have a chicken. Maybe the devils want a chicken and not a pig. So they did the same thing with the chicken. And the father gave his prayer to the devils, and they waited and nothing happened. Then they called the witch doctor from the village, and he came and did his incantations and shook his charms, and they waited a couple of days. Nothing happened. They called the bark doctor, who came with special bark and teas made from bark. And they called the root doctor, who came with special root and teas made from roots. Then they decided the next one they should call was the Buddhist priest. So they sent messengers to the Buddhist priest at the monastery a couple of miles away. And when the priest came to the village, everyone knew he was coming because he was preceded by a parade of boys who were carrying a big metal gong on their shoulders. And they would ring the gong and call out, here he comes, here he comes. And everyone in the village came rushing out. Even though they worshiped devils, they also believed that the Buddhist priests were important. And so they came rushing out from their huts and they lined the streets of the village. And as the Buddhist priest walked down through the middle of the village to Very Tall's parents' home, everyone bowed in front of him as he passed by, except for one person. One person stood very tall, and his name was Very Tall. Very Tall had learned at the mission school, you should not worship anyone except God. You shall have no other gods before me. And Very Tall thought to himself, the Bible would not want me, God and his Bible do not want me to bow down to another person. I will not worship him. And when Very Tall's mother, looking out through the slats in the side of her hut, saw Very Tall standing there, not bowing like everyone else was, she was so angry with him, she yelled at him through the hut's walls, "Bow down, you little white-toothed dog! Bow down, you little white-toothed dog! The priest is here to help me. You are causing problems. Bow down!" Oh, that must have felt so hurtful for Very Tall to have his mother screaming at him and calling him a dog. But Very Tall's father had been observing what was going on and noticing how she hadn't been getting better from all the things they had tried. And he came up to the mother and said, don't bother Very Tall. Nothing has been making you better. And I don't even know that the priest prayers will make you better. And they didn't. The priest prayed for hours, setting up a little statue in which he burned some candles and some incense, praying and praying in a long, monotonous, droning voice. And then he left, and they waited the next day and the next. Still nothing happened. Still Very Tall's mother did not get better. And that's when Very Tall's father came up to him, and he pulled him aside and said, Very Tall, we've tried everything we can think of. Do you think maybe you could pray to the white man's God? Sure, father, said Very Tall. He'd been waiting for just this opportunity. Let's pray now. Just kneel down, father. His father had never prayed to God before. So Very Tall had to teach him. Kneel down here and let's close our eyes. And then I'm going to pray. And when I'm done, you say amen, okay? Then Very Tall prayed a prayer. And it was pretty simple, but it was so powerful. He said, Dear Jesus, please make my mother better. Please help her know that you're stronger than evil spirits. Please help her know you want to be her God and not just the white man's God. Amen. And Very Tall's father, who didn't even know what to say because the prayer had seemed so easy and so simple, just said, Amen. And then over in the corner, they heard a sound. And it was Very Tall's mother, and she was crying. She was trying to keep it quiet by putting her hand over her mouth, but she couldn't keep it in because she felt so guilty for having cursed at Very Tall, for talking to him so meanly. And yet here he was praying for her. And then Very Tall's mother looked at him and said, I'm already starting to feel better. And by the next morning, Very Tall's mother was able to sit up in bed. And by the day after that, she was able to get out of her little mat in the corner of the room and cook for the family. And then she told Very Tall, I want you to go back to your school in Tiger Village. And I want you to tell your teacher that I am better because you prayed to the living God. I'm not better because we prayed to devils. I'm not better because we made sacrifices. I'm not better because we prayed to statues. I'm better because you prayed to the living God, and he's my God too. And that was more treasure that had been found in the jungle, real treasure. People who didn't know about God, people who were enslaved to their beliefs about the devils and about worshiping idols, and now had been set free. But Elder Hare also found some treasure of silver and brass, real silver and real brass. You might be wondering what it was. Well, Elder Hare knew how to play an instrument. He played a trumpet. And Elder Baird, the man who had gotten that bad attack of malaria, he could play a trumpet too, as well as could another man named Dr. Melendi, who was helping them there in the jungle. So when Elder Hare and these two other men took some of the big boys from their Onda mission school to visit a jungle village way back in the jungle, they took their trumpets along, as well as their medicines and their picture rolls. And normally they would go to a village and they would slowly gain everybody's trust, and they would teach them that they were there to help heal them. But this time, people weren't even waiting to talk to them. And when the villagers saw them arriving, they went running off into the jungle yelling. Remember what they would yell? Dataka, Dataka, because Dataka was the name that these people had in their belief system for something that was half ghost and half demon, and it was going to steal your children, fatten them up, and eat them. Oh, said Elder Hare, Dataka again. Well, why don't we try playing some music, he said. And so the three men got out their trumpets, and they began to play a hymn. And as they played music, it looked as if the jungle was sprouting people. People were suddenly popping out from behind trees, from under huts, from out of branches, and running back into the village and gathering around to see what was happening. And they all gathered there quietly listening. And when they were done playing the trumpet music, Elder Hare preached to them, and the people all just listened intently. And the big schoolboys who had come along all looked at each other and said, "Oh, we know what did it. Yes, we know what brought the people out. It was those silver trumpets." Hey, they began to say to each other, "What if we all had silver trumpets to play?" Well, Elder Hare heard the boys talking about this and he thought that might be a good idea. So the next time that Elder Hare was on furlough, he began telling people that story. Furlough, in this case, was when a missionary goes on vacation back to their home. So they go back to wherever they lived or grown up, and they get to spend some time away from the mission field before they go back once again to work. So when Elder Hare was on furlough, going around from church to church in New Zealand and Australia, he started telling people the story of these boys in the jungle and that's at their mission school who wanted to learn to play trumpets and instruments. And people began to donate. Some people just donated some money, but some people actually had instruments, old instruments they weren't using, and they donated silver wind instruments and brass wind instruments like French horns and flugelhorns and euphoniums. And then Elder Hare packed them up into boxes and took them when he returned from furlough back to Onda. He brought the boxes along with him. When he arrived there, he called out the names of 23 boys because now he had 23 instruments. He said, "I've selected you 23 boys to come tomorrow morning and we will unpack these special boxes." Well, the next morning, before the sun was even up, the boys were there waiting for Elder Hare to come outside and open up these boxes that had all been brought back from his furlough. And it wasn't just 23 boys that showed up, over 100 boys showed up, all excited to see what was in these boxes. And as Elder Hare unpacked the first box, he reached in and he pulled out an instrument called a French horn. Now, the boys had never seen a French horn. They'd only ever seen trumpets before. And he said, here, Owen Bwint, I want you to learn to play the French horn. And he gave it to Owen Bwint, and Owen Bwint looked at it, and it was all strange. It had all these curls in it and loops, and he didn't even know where to put his mouth. He tried putting his head into the big end of the French horn, and then that didn't seem to work. Elder Hare had to show him where to put his mouth and how to purse his lips and try to blow. And after a couple of minutes of trying, Owen Bwint started to make some weird squawking noises. It wasn't really music, but it was noise. And Owen Bwint went off into one corner of the mission compound grounds and began squawking as loud as he could. And then within a few more minutes, another boy was squawking, then another, and another. And after about 10 minutes of all 23 boys squawking on 23 different instruments that they had no idea how to play, Elder Hare's wife came running out of the mission building, out of the mission home where they lived, with the baby in her arms, running towards the jungle saying, "I'm gonna go crazy from all this noise." Well, she didn't go crazy, but for the next 3 days, there was a constant screeching of music or, well, instruments every day from the first moment of sunrise until the sun had set. Boys squawking and screeching and squealing, and not a single drop that sounded like music at all. But the boys weren't just trying to practice the instruments, they were also praying about it. Every night at bedtime, each boy would kneel down next to his bed there in the mission school, and they would pray, "God, help us. We want to blow the band so we can help Tara preach the gospel." And God must have helped them because, within 4 weeks, those 23 boys who had never played any music before ever were able to play 3 simple hymns, just 3. They could play those 3 hymns over and over. But when Elder Hare took them with him out to the next jungle village that they went to visit, and he lined up all 23 of those boys plus Elder Hare and the 2 other trumpeters, and they all began to play their music. Oh, people came running to the meetings. Nobody was calling out about Dr. Cause anymore. Nobody was hiding in the jungle. Everybody wanted to come and hear the music. The music seemed to keep them from being afraid. And that's an important lesson for us too. If you're ever feeling afraid, don't forget, hum a song to yourself, sing a hymn, whistle a tune you've heard in church before, because songs and music can drive away our fears. Well, people liked the music so much that more people started to come to visit at the mission station when they would have church or Sabbath school on the weekend. And then when Elder Hare announced that they were going to have a camp meeting, people showed up in droves. Over 1,500 people came from jungle villages many miles away to attend a week-long camp meeting there in the jungles of Onda along the Salween River. There were so many people there singing songs together. And Elder Hare wrote in his book that one of the happiest moments in his life was listening to all of these people singing along to the hymn, in a little while, in a little while, we shall cross the billows foam. We shall meet at last when the stormy winds are past. In a little while, we're going home. What a treasure that Elder Hare had found. Not just the real silver and brass treasure of those instruments that had been donated by all the loving people in New Zealand and Australia, but also the greater treasure of more people who had learned to love Jesus because they had heard the music singing and playing. But of course, whenever anything is going well, whenever God is making progress to reach people, you know Satan's going to be upset. And that camp meeting was attacked by Satan for sure. One night, there was a heavy rainstorm, and a flood came down the Salween River, overflowing the banks with mud 3 inches thick. It covered the entire camp meeting ground with thick, thick mud. But the following day, everyone sang hymns while they cleaned up the mess. A couple days later, a tornado came and it tore the roof right off the main mission school building. But while the people were hiding, crouched underneath those desks and tables made from the spirit tree wood, they were singing. And the next day, as they were cleaning up the mess and getting a new roof put onto the building, they were all singing hymns, showing that their love for Jesus would not be frightened off by Satan and his attacks. Because Satan and the evil angels, they are real. That's one of the lessons we've been learning. And they can be scary. But God, he's real and he's stronger than they are. And when we have God, we have no need to fear. Well, another lesson that Elder Hare learned about trusting God during scary times was when he had to go on a hike with an evangelist named Tam Ya-ing. Tam Ya-ing was a Karen man who had been trained to be an evangelist in the jungle villages. And one day, Elder Hare and Tam Ya-ing were traveling back to Onda, the mission station. They were supposed to be picked up by a boat at a dock about 20 miles downriver, but the boat didn't show up. And they didn't want to have to just sit there all night long. And so they looked around and realized it's a full moon. And there's a nice trail that we could follow for 20 miles to get all the way back to Onda. We can just follow the telegraph poles that have been put in by the government. We'll just walk along. The moon will show us where the poles are. And we'll just follow them. It's a nice straight trail. Surely we can get there. Well, they set off hiking. And after they'd hiked for about 4 or 5 miles, something began to happen. Something showed up all of a sudden with noise and wetness. What do you think it was? Oh, yes, it was another thunderstorm. Just like poor Elder Hare had suffered through other thunderstorms before. Remember, we heard about a really scary one a couple of weeks ago. Well, another thunderstorm came, and this one had a lot of lightning. And since they weren't even near any villages, they just had to keep on walking, hoping that they would be able to make it. The lightning would flash, and they'd be able to see in that brief moment of light where the telegraph poles were. And so they kept following along the poles. And if they ever didn't know where a pole was, they'd have to wait until another lightning would flash. Then they would walk along some more to the next pole. But it was raining so hard that the water was starting to build up along the trails. The water wasn't just going into the rivers. It wasn't just flowing in the creeks. It was actually flowing down the jungle paths. And the water on the trail began to reach up to their knees. Then it came up higher to their waists. Have you ever been out for a hike and had water up to your waist? I doubt you have. Finally, they reached a creek and they knew that there was a wire bridge hanging down over the creek. Not a log that will go straight across, but a wire bridge that would dip down. You would start at one side, you'd have to go down to the middle of the bridge and then go up to the other side. And as they stood there on one side of the creek, looking at that wire bridge in the darkness, they wondered to each other, I wonder if the bottom part of that bridge is still above the water. I guess we'll find out. So Elder Hare and Tam Ya-ing got down on their hands and knees and began crawling down the bridge, sloping downward, downward, downward. And just as they had been going what they thought might have been halfway, there was an amazing boom and flash of light, and a lightning bolt struck a tree just 200 feet away. There was so much electricity in the air that their hair just stood up on end. The hair in their bodies all stood up. They were paralyzed for a few seconds, like they couldn't move. There'd been so much shock nearby. Then they looked at each other and said, let's keep going. And thankfully, they realized they were starting to climb upwards now instead of downwards. Yes, they had gotten past the halfway point of the bridge. When they got off that bridge, Elder Hare looked at Tam Ya-ing and said, do you think we have more of those bridges to cross? Tam Ya-ing said, I think we have 2 more to go. Oh, they did, but they made it across those safely too. Then they started getting further along the path, and they knew the path would lead into a rice field. And now rice fields might sound like a nice place to go for a hike, but not when there's a lot of rain and flooding. See, rice fields are designed to be flooded a lot. they would actually be built with a wall around the field to hold water in, because the rice could grow well and the water would drown the other weeds that would normally cause problems for the rice. So now if you have a field that's surrounded by a wall, you know that the water is going to be deeper there. And that was the field they had to cross, a huge field. And the telegraph pole line went right through the middle of it. So they entered the rice field and began walking in. Very quickly, the water was up to their waist. But then after a few more minutes of walking, the water was up to their armpits. And then, Tamyaing called out, "Well, Tara, looks like the devils are really angry with us." "Yes, I think so," said Elder Hare. They walked on a little further, and now the water was up to their necks. And Elder Hare couldn't take it any longer. He called out, "Tamyaing, stop, stop. Let's wait for the next lightning flash to see where we are." Tamyaing didn't reply. "Tamyaing?" Elder Hare didn't want to just begin wandering around in the darkness, groping, so he decided he would stand still and wait for the next lightning flash, not only to see the telegraph poles, but also hopefully to see where Tamyaing was. Had he gotten far ahead of him? Had he gotten behind him? Then there came the lightning flash, a bright streak of light across the sky. And as the lightning flashed, Elder Hare looked quickly around. He could see telegraph poles, he could see water stretching in every direction, but he could not see Tamyaing, for Tamyaing had disappeared. And we'll find out where he went next week. I look forward to continuing the story with you. God bless all of you and happy Sabbath. Bye.